Good morning. Good morning. Welcome to the Charleston Library Society. So good to see you all here this morning. We're just beginning our programs in earnest, and it's so nice to be back and to have you all here this morning. Thank you. My name is Lisa Hayes, and I'm the Director of Collections here at the Library Society. And I want to welcome you and our book club committee members here this morning. We're going to be hearing from Sugar Slaubaugh and Gus Smith here today about the book Heaven and Earth Grocery Store, which will be a really interesting discussion, I know. The book club will be meeting again in October. I want to tell you all about that. The Demon of Unrest is our next selection, October 30th. Hope you all can make it then. And let's see. We're going to be doing the questions a little differently today than we have in the past. Sugar and Gus are going to be speaking, and then we'll intersperse time for questions throughout the program this morning. So just be ready for that. We'll have microphones that we'll pass around. Please wait for the microphone if you can, because we're recording today. If I push the button, we're recording today. Is it on? You already got it. Thank you. So that, in the recording, we'll be able to hear the people's questions. And I think we're ready to begin. Just take a moment. Be sure your cell phones are silenced. And welcome, Sugar and Gus. Thank you.
Welcome. I'm Sugar Slaubaugh. My friend Mary Gus Smith. We've been friends for a lifetime, I think. And are so glad to be here with you to talk about the Heaven and Earth Grocery Store. James McBride's new novel is a lot of things. It's at the beginning of whodunit. It's also a heist story and a love story. But it's mostly a close look at community in Pottstown, Pennsylvania. At the heart of that community is a couple, Moshe and Shona, Jewish immigrants who live in a poor neighborhood called Chicken Hill. Before discussing this amazing book, let's first get to know its creator, James McBride. James McBride's father, Reverend Andrew McBride, was African American and died of cancer at 45. His mother was a Jewish immigrant from Poland. McBride lived in Brooklyn's Red Hook housing projects until he was 7. He is the 8th of 12 children, living in his, quote, orchestrated chaos. Being a mother of 2, I can only imagine. His landmark memoir, The Color of Water, a black man's tribute to his white mother in 1996, is considered an American classic, taught in schools and universities. The Color of Water teaches readers of all colors as a vivid portrait of growing up, a haunting meditation on race and identity. From the book, God is the color of water. Water doesn't have a color. A touching sentiment reflected in the Heaven and Earth Grocery Store. McBride graduated from New York City Public Schools, going to Oberlin Conservatory of Music to study composition and saxophone. He has toured as a saxophonist sideman with jazz legends and written music for many jazz greats, and even for the PBS character Barney. If some of you were here for our discussion of Barbara Kingsolver's Demon Copperhead, you may remember that I shared with you that she played keyboard in a band of writers, the Rock Bottom Remainders. Others in the band include Stephen King, Dave Barry, Amy Tan, Scott Turow, and James McBride. With the royalties from his first book, he soundproofed a studio in his home so that he would no longer bother his neighbors playing his sax. McBride has a master's degree from the Graduate School of Journalism at Columbia University. In 2015, he was awarded the National Humanities Medal by President Obama for humanizing the complexities of discussing race in America.
So about the writing of Heaven and Earth Grocery Store, in the acknowledgments at the end of his novel, James McBride cites as his inspiration a camp just outside Philadelphia where he worked as a counselor every summer as a college student during the 1970s. At the time, it was called the Variety Club Camp for Handicapped Children. He says that those kids showed him how to live. In a tip of his hat to that inspirational camp, characters with disabilities also play crucial roles in McBride's story. Dodo, Chona, Monkey Pants, Doc Roberts, several performing musicians at the dance hall all had disabilities. This remarkable camp director, McBride says, taught him lifetime lessons about inclusivity, love, and acceptance, all without pontificating. McBride tried and failed for years, he said, to write about that camp. Eventually, it morphed into a novel about Pottstown, Pennsylvania, and an historically Black and immigrant Jewish neighborhood called Chicken Hill. McBride's dedication at the beginning of the novel reads, "To Cy Friend, who taught all of us the meaning of tikkun olam," trying to say that correctly. This is a Hebrew phrase that translates to repairing the world or mend the world. It is a central teaching in Jewish religious tradition and has evolved in over 2,000 years of Jewish thought and practice. Today, American Jews consider tikkun olam a cornerstone of their Jewish identity, and it is synonymous with social justice and establishment of godly qualities throughout the world, based on the idea that Jews bear responsibility not only for their own moral, spiritual, and material welfare, but also for the welfare of society at large. Chona's belief was that every act of living was a chance for tikkun olam, to improve the world. Why did the author give his novel and the store the name Heaven and Earth Grocery Store? Because it means love and community, the theme of building a community across cultures. In an interview with the author, I will share with you a quote. McBride stated that cynicism is not a good thing, but skepticism is. Cynicism means that you have made assumptions. Skepticism means you are searching for the truth. He said that the truth is, if you want to see the world and you work at it, it makes you better. It makes you stronger. It makes you more tolerant, and it makes you happier, and it makes you less cynical.
Got your picture there for Pottstown? Have you got your picture there of Pottstown? You want me to start? Okay.
You gotta do your
Part 1 opens in 1972 with an old Jewish man, Malachi, being questioned about a skeleton that was found in a well in the Chicken Hill area of Pottstown, Pennsylvania, along with a mezuzah linking the skeleton to him. The next day, a storm blows through the area, destroying everything around, including the well, the skeleton, and any possible evidence of Malachi, and he leaves town. There is Pottstown. If the book had never specified a setting, would you have assumed that it was set in the Deep South?
Yes.
Were you surprised by the level of racism, KKK activity, religious tolerance, and abject poverty in 1930s Pottstown, Pennsylvania? What do you think? Did it seem Southern to you? It did. To me, it seemed very much like a small town in the Deep South. Not even, we were born and raised in Kentucky, not even in Kentucky, but in the very Deep South. All right. we'll go on to,
Well, we'll talk about Pottstown a little bit now. It's not in the South. William Penn deeded the land located on the Schuylkill River. Had to look that pronunciation up, not being from the Philadelphia area. It's about 40 miles northwest of Philadelphia, which is now Pottstown and the surrounding area, to his son John in 1701. Chicken Hill was a thriving polygon of working-class families in the early 20th century. By 1930, the community was an intercultural neighborhood with blacks, Jews, white residents that had little in common with each other besides low economic status. The population of the area included Russians, Poles, Lithuanians, Romanians, Irish, Italians, Native Americans, and African Americans. In the 20th century, by providing unskilled and semi-skilled labor, the people that lived on Chicken Hill were small but essential cogs in the machinery of the surrounding, largely white Anglo-Saxon Protestant community. The name Chicken Hill was a pejorative name applied to this minority community because it seemed like everybody in the area was raising chickens to supplement their income. And you remember it was the eggman that helped get Dodo to free Dodo. The small working class enclave of Chicken Hill is typical of many such neighborhoods throughout the United States. These communities arose, functioned, and disappeared for all kinds of local reasons, but their legacies persist in the fabric of the communities that followed. In all its heart and heartbreak, faith and filth, diversity and absurdity, Pottstown is America to James McBride, though not so much for Moshe, who aspired to move to a more respectable neighborhood, where the Americans are, he told Chona, to which Chona replied, America is here.
all right, our narrative then jumps back from 1972, 47 years ago, and introduces Moshe Ludlow, a young, poor Jewish man who owns a small dance hall and theater in the area. Moshe is on the verge of losing everything when he meets Chona, the daughter of a rabbi who owns the Heaven and Earth grocery store, the only Jewish grocery in the area. She is intelligent and lovely. Sorry about that. She is intelligent and lovely, but has a lame leg due to polio. You know, we're back far enough that polio they didn't have vaccinations and stuff. Chona continues to have an occasional tremor or seizures because of the polio. They marry, and the years after, Moshe grows prosperous. Despite not needing to work, Chona chooses to keep running the store. When the other Jewish families leave Chicken Hill, which is poor, largely black area, Moshe wants to leave and moves to a nicer place. Chona insists on staying here with her community. 12 years into their marriage, Chona falls ill and continues to worsen. One day, Malachi appears bringing Moshe a loaf of challah. Malachi remembers Moshe from when Moshe's fortunes started turning around. Moshe remembers Malachi as a fantastic dancer. Malachi continues bringing challah, and Chona's health begins to improve. As a sidelight, I just told Mike I'm going home this afternoon to make challah for dinner. I hope it will improve any ills in our group. Moshe attributes it to some type of magic Malachi seems to bring wherever he goes. Meanwhile, Nate and Addie Timlin, you all have got a list of characters floating around, I think. Meanwhile, Nate and Addie Timlin are close friends and employees of Moshe and Chona, as well as highly respected members of the black community in Pottstown. When Addie's sister suddenly dies, the government takes an interest in taking her deaf 12-year-old boy, Dodo, into custody to send him to a special school, the Pennhurst School. Pennhurst is meant for the mentally unwell and is no place for the boy. Nate asks Moshe for help in hiding Dodo, and Moshe and Chona take him in. They lie to the government officials, saying that Dodo has left the state. Bernice Davis is Chona's neighbor. Chona asks her for help hiding Dodo, and Bernice quickly offers to let Chona cut a hole in her fence so Dodo can come hide among her black kids in case anyone comes snooping around. The state continues to look for the boy, and people suspect that someone must have told them that Dodo's still there. Doc Roberts, remember Doc Roberts, is the town's physician and is a member of the KKK. He's asked to help locate the boy and check him out. Like Chona, Doc also has had polio as a child, resulting in an unsteady gait, and he once had an interest in Chona when they were in high school. He shows up at the grocery to talk to Chona based on rumors that she's harboring the boy. As they talk, Chona argues with him about his KKK activities, and suddenly she has a seizure. Instead of helping her, Doc takes advantage of her vulnerable state to sexually assault her, and Dodo tries to stop him. Chona has an even more serious seizure. When the situation is under control, Doc brings 2 policemen to detain Dodo. Dodo flees, but is injured and caught.
I put up on the screen now a page from the Pottstown Mercury newspaper about how the Klan thrived in that area. There were so many people of color in that area. From page 162 in the book, there's a quote, "I didn't know there were so many Spanish people around here," he mumbled. Mario smiled. "To you, they're Spanish. To me, they're Puerto Rican, Dominican, Panamanian, Cuban, Ecuadorian, Mexican, Africano, Afro-Cubano, a lot of different things, a lot of sounds mixed together." So a question I thought about, and did you feel that some individuals lump people together by their skin tone or language? Have you ever witnessed someone erroneously making an assumption about people knowing one another or presumed they would get along just because they spoke the same language or were similar in skin color? Moshe had a courageous act of desegregating the local theater by booking black entertainers in a prominent theme. And what did he name his place? The All-American Dance Hall and Theater. How does the novel depict the challenges and triumphs of integrating a community of so many different people? Anyone?
Should we do this? Yeah.
Anyone?
Does anybody have any thoughts about that?
All right, we'll move on to the summary.
Repeat the question specifically again.
Say it again.
Just repeat the question exactly the way I wasn't.
I said, how does the novel depict the challenges and triumphs of integrating a community? That too deep, too much in there?
Well,
We'll move on.
I wasn't going to try to dissect the novel, but I think we all know that integrating any community, whether it was in the 30s or even now, is complicated, difficult, and unfortunately rarely ever occurs. I mean, you just have to look at your own community and down the street and across the street to see that it's rare.
Not easy, it's a challenge. Thank you, Mike.
Well, they also discuss within the Jewish community, there were so many different nationalities. Because they were all Jewish, it didn't mean that everybody was going to get along because the nationalities didn't all get along.
They were all European immigrants.
Right, they were all European immigrants, but at the same time, they were all different nationalities. They were Lithuanian, they were Russian, they were Polish, they were German, and a lot of the countries didn't have any use for each other.
Exactly.
But at the same time, in that community, because of the way Shona ruled the community, she was able to bring the different nationalities and the different ethnicities together purely because she viewed them all as people. And the thing that she always said to Moisha was, their money spends the same. And that was just her way of saying we're all the same people. So, yeah.
I thought what was so interesting about the novel is it really is the history of America and the story of immigration. But there is integration of ethnicity, but there's also classism in this. So I grew up in Iowa, and my grandfather was from an island in the Dodecanese chain of islands in Greece called Rhodes, 7 miles from Turkey. And he wound up in 1920s and 30s, Davenport, Iowa. And he told me that he was considered African American. So to your point about do people see, do they distinguish? And the answer is no. I mean, that's to lump someone from the Mediterranean with an African is, they're not that far apart. But so I think the level of, because of the dynamics, the level of mistrust because of the influx of immigrants was so high. But then we see it as there's a pecking order within those immigrants, right? The people who may have been Jewish and moved down the hill then looked down upon the ones that were still up on the hill. And we still face these challenges today. In fact, I think classism is even
Maybe worse.
more prevalent than ever.
Thank you. In part 2, Dodo awakens at the Penthurst Hospital ward, and Chona is in the Reading Hospital in a coma. Nate is furious about what has happened to his nephew. Meanwhile, people are also hearing about Doc Roberts sexually assaulting Chona instead of helping her. A week after that assault, she passes away. Chona is undeniably the heart of this story. In an interview, James McBride read this passage from the book. If you've got your book, it's on page 23. Chona's years of stirring butter, sorting vegetables, and reading in the back room of the Heaven and Earth grocery store had given her the time to consider. She read everything as a child, comics, detective books. And by the time she became a young wife, she evolved into reading about socialism and unions. She subscribed to Jewish newspapers, publications in Hebrew, and books on Jewish life, some from Europe. She knew more Hebrew than any Jewish woman in town. She could recite the Talmud better than most of the men in shul. Instead of sitting with the women in the balcony, she insisted on divining, which is, I looked that up, I didn't know that word, is reciting liturgical prayers downstairs with the men, claiming her bad foot prevented her from climbing stairs. McBride went on to say she was modeled after my own mother and grandmother, because my mother was Jewish, raised in an Orthodox Jewish home in Virginia. My grandmother lived a difficult life. This is Mr. McBride talking. You know, she had a terrible marriage, and her husband was not a very good person. And she died. Really, she lost a lot before she died. You know, my mother ran away from home, and my uncle, he ran away from home when he was 15. He joined the army and was killed in World War II. And so I wanted my grandmother to have a better life. So I put her on the page and made her loved. What are some of the ways she held this community together? How did her actions affect the Chicken Hill residents even after her death? Do you recall early in the story, she gave groceries to the folks who couldn't pay for their groceries? Yeah. I mean, as far as she was concerned, everybody needed food. And I know that I agree that the Heaven and Earth grocery store is named that because it's community. But it also has to have a bit of a divine feeling about it. It's not just a grocery store on the earth. It is a grocery store divined from heaven, no matter what the religion, because we have all those different religions represented here in this community. But that's where that feeling came from, that giving and caring and understanding all of those around you and wanting to be sure that everybody was fed. I kind of wish we had a Heaven and Earth grocery store on the corner.
I just love the way that Chona helped the families through the children with the thing with the marbles.
Yes.
And, so it was like, it helped preserve people's pride, the adults, their pride, by helping them through the children.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I just thought that was wonderful. I love that whole bit.
I know, I did. Well, she was just such a remarkable character, and she was so larger than life because she dies early on in this story. Really, if you think about it, because after her we get you'll see here in a minute. After her we get the organization to get the child out and everything else. She's just larger than life, and he knew his grandmother. It sounds like, but not well. And I think he had such a soft spot in his heart for her. I think it's wonderful that he wanted her to be loved and cared for. So this is her. I wish I could write. I mean, I could do something like that, I think. All right, we're going to go back to our little summary here, and then we're to part 3. And we, in part 3, we have the plans begin to form around getting Dodo out of Pennhurst. Moshe's successful cousin Isaac offers to hire a lawyer to help. But Nate feels strongly that the law is whatever, quote, white man says it is, and that they need to take matters into their own hands. In Pennhurst, Dodo befriends a boy with cerebral palsy that he nicknames Monkey Pants. There is an evil and twisted attendant there named Son of Man who abuses young boys. Monkey Pants tries to protect Dodo from Son of Man, though the episode causes Monkey Pants to have a seizure and he dies.
I'm going to take a little trip to Pennhurst now. The first buildings, it was originally named the Eastern Pennsylvania State Institution for the Feeble-Minded and Epileptic. The first buildings of the Eastern State Institution, then became known as Pennhurst, happened between 1903 and 1908. November 23rd, 1908, he's listed as patient number 1, a practice that was carried forward for all of Pennhurst, over 10,000 residents. For many parents, there was no other option in place to help with a disabled child other than to send them to Pennhurst. There was tremendous pressure to admit many different persons whom society, steeped in the eugenics movement, wanted removed from the gene pool, including immigrants, orphans, criminals, etc. But even the stated mission of Pennhurst, to house epileptics and the feeble-minded, came under fire from within the institution as early as 1912. Residents were abused, they were neglected, they were beaten and assaulted. In 1955, there was as many as 3,500 individuals at Pennhurst. In 1968, the conditions at Pennhurst are exposed in a 5-part television news report called Suffered the Little Children, anchored by a local CBS correspondent, Bill Baldini. He took viewers inside the walls of the now 60-year-old institution. The scenes, which included caged children, were chilling. I got a hold of that documentary, so for 4 minutes we're going to go inside Pennhurst in 1968. What am I doing wrong, Gabriel?
We need that arrow.
Okay.
Sights and Sounds of Penhurst, the state institution for the mentally retarded. It's located in Spring City, Chester County. In 1908, when the institution first opened, the man in charge bitterly complained to the state that the conditions were already overcrowded. He transferred many of the patients to Q1, a classroom building. Many of them are still there. In the 18th century, the mentally retarded were often ignored, punished, and exploited. Today, things are supposed to be different. Modern 20th century man is much more scientific and civilized. Today, we no longer punish the mentally retarded. We don't exploit them either. We have come a long, long way. Now, we ship them 25 miles out of town to a state-operated institution and forget them while they decay from neglect. Penhurst was first opened 60 years ago when the answers to the problem of mental retardation were considered to be segregation and sterilization. Sterilization, of course, is a thing of the past, but the archaic practices of segregation and custodial care are still with us and seemingly with the approval of society. The 2,800 children, young and old alike, residing within the confines of Penhurst are for the most part protected from society, and the granite wall of ignorance and social blindness protects society from them. These unfortunates are being deprived of their dignity and self-respect. Why? Because only a very, very few seem to care. The horrible and almost inhumane conditions that prevail at Penhurst are not the fault of a handful of dedicated doctors, administrators, and attendants employed there. No, the children, as they are all called, who are rotting in their cages, cribs, and beds, can thank society for their dreadful plight. We have forsaken them, not in the sense of what we have done to them, but because of what we have failed to do on their behalf. Unlike other minority groups, the mentally retarded have never had a brilliant orator to trumpet their suffering and appeal to the conscience of other men. Many of these children have always been without the benefit of parental love or guidance, partly because of the stigma of shame attached to their illness. They have been abandoned and placed at the mercy of the state. In the case of Penhurst, the state has failed to do its moral duty. During the next 4 evenings, TV10 will delve into the problems of Penhurst. We hope to find out why the current conditions exist, what are the problems facing the people running the institution, what has been accomplished in the past, and what must be done to correct the injustices the mentally retarded have endured much, much too long. We entitle our investigative report, Suffer the Little Children.
Gives you a better visual of Dodo and Monkey Pants in their crib, reaching out, just a finger to touch each other with.
Guys, what was the date of the
1968 was when this documentary was first produced. It's called Suffer the Little Children. If you want to pull it up, you can on YouTube. Suffer the Little Children, CBS. It was not until May 30th, 1974, that the mother of a Penhurst resident filed a civil rights case against the school. It took 20 more years in 1986-87 for Penhurst to finally be closed after this documentary came to light and exposed the horrid conditions there. Your question.
Cordodo how much of his incarceration and treatment at the Penhurst State Hospital for the insane and feeble-minded was driven by misguided medical care the day, or was it racism, or was it evil intent? What do you think drove people to live like that? And think in terms, or for me, I didn't realize it was a real place when I was reading the book. And I don't know what, I think that as I was reading it, having already read some comments about Mr. McBride and how that this Chona was his grandmother, I thought, well, maybe some of this other stuff is actually real. So I Googled Penhurst and learned that it was. Did you have a Penhurst in your hometown?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, in my state of Georgia, we have one. And I actually went there when I was a girl with a woman who worked for my family. Her sister had been put in this institution.
Wow.
And when I was seeing those pictures, it was just like I was back there.
I bet.
It was horrible. It was just awful. And that's all I can say. I don't know why I didn't grow up to crusade on it, but anyway.
Well, I think we didn't realize, it's not that we didn't realize it was wrong, but we didn't, I don't know that we knew there was an alternative. There was one in Lexington. We grew up in Lexington, or I grew up in Lexington, Kentucky. Gussie was down the road, maybe more enlightened in Louisville. They didn't have one, but ours was the ironically, Eastern State Hospital. And Penhurst was originally called Eastern State. I wonder if it makes me wonder if that was a national name. But I too remember going out there. I didn't know anyone that was there, but as a young girl in clubs and things, we would take stuff. We would make cookies, or we would make toys, and we would take things out to be shared with the folks out there. And I can remember feeling just weak and almost nauseated when I would leave. It just blew me away that was how somebody could live. Now, that didn't close, I don't believe, in Lexington till the 70s. I think it closed while we were in college, which is sad to say that it took that long, in my opinion. It is now, it lived empty and forlorn for years, and it's now actually a community college, which was a good reuse of sad space. But you just wonder, and those images were incredible, Gus. I mean, you could really feel like seeing him right there.
So, I'm sorry, do you have a comment?
While we're on Penhurst, and I'm sorry if I'm
No.
superseding, but I'm really curious about Son of Man, his name. He gave me the chills. And whereas I think Chona is the conscience of the community, he reflects the sinister, obviously, but just his name, Son of Man, does that mean it's in all of us, or is he a reflection of
That's an interesting question.
the dark side of humanity? And I mean, to be that awful, he had to be abused himself, right? So I was really curious about his name. I
It's
wondered
interesting. He didn't have a name literally. If he wasn't John or Joe. Why do you think McBride gave him that? Called him the Son of Man? I think it to me it's very symbolic of man. And he, as a group, as an entity, I guess, and he is the son of that big group. And within that big group of all of us are all those bad things. It really.
Which brings us to the number of characters in this book. I counted over 30 major characters. So a lot of people, McBride's style here won't please readers who want the author to cut to the chase. And I'll admit that early on, I felt annoyed when another new character would take center stage instead of the novel getting on with this business of who did what, how come, what's going to happen to Dodo, what is their connection to Moshe and Chona. Why the heck did I need to know in 12 pages about the water system of Chicken Hill? And what is it all about the bullfrog and the mikvah? I'm sort of, but then I began to realize McBride's story is not to be rushed. He wants to show you the whole world, all of these people and characters. He wants to build this community and display its full constellation of characters, all of whom orbit around one another with different gravities, pushing and pulling the story in different directions. The skeleton at the novel's start is almost forgotten as the story lives in the town's past, patiently braiding the tale of this large cast as we make our way back to those promised bones. Meanwhile, McBride very cleverly begins to open a door to the skeletons, all of them, in our national closet.
I was just going back just a little bit. To me, Son of Man was simply an oxymoron. He was absolutely the opposite of Jesus Christ. And, that's my own way of interpreting that. And if I can say one other thing, and this is not always a good thing to say, unfortunately, closing Penhurst and Eastern State, we still have institutions that care for those people, but most of them are now on the street. And that's why we have all the homeless people that we have in this country that we are not taking care of.
All right, we're going to go back to our story again and maybe talk about the water supply. Meanwhile, there has been an ongoing issue at the synagogue regarding their water supply. The water supply in town is controlled by the Plitzka family, and Gus Plitzka is the head counselor. Despite the Plitzka's contract to supply town water to the town, they refuse to run pipes to the synagogue. Paper, a beautiful woman who supplies everyone with gossip, enlists her co-worker Miggy to help bust Dodo out of Penhurst. Miggy agrees to put Nate in touch with Bullis, who has a job delivering eggs from the nearby farm to the various buildings around Penhurst. The plan is to have Bullis help get Dodo out of the ward in his cart and then use the tunnels around Penhurst to get them to the railroad. Memorial Day weekend in 1936, at the town parade, a hitman arrives from Philadelphia to rough up Plitzka, but accidentally mistakes Plitzka for Doc. Remember, they changed jackets, the red and the blue jackets, and he pushes Doc, thinking it's Plitzka, into the well. Doc has on him a necklace Moshe once made for Malachi, but it was given to Chona instead and stolen by Doc when he assaulted her. See all those pieces? Little weaved, little crocheted blanket here starts coming together. The book ends by explaining that Nate and Dodo end up settling down at a farm in South Carolina. Don't we love that they came to South Carolina? And Addie joins them. Dodo takes the name Nate Love II and has kids and grandkids of his own. Dodo's last words were, "Thank you, Monkey Pants."
I forgot to inject into here, before we end this, that McBride in an interview said that he feels that the humanity of people far exceeds the differences. And I would like to ask if anyone would like to talk about what specific scene or characters had a profound emotional impact on you.
He's got his page dog here. He told me he likes this.
Yeah, I really recommend everybody take another look at page 62. Now, my grandfather could have been Malachi, although, and I'm going to now speak frankly, bigotry and stereotype
you usually say, well, there's this whole black community or this whole Jewish community, and I don't like them, but I like this one. Or you're okay. I mean, I grew up, I don't know how many times I've heard, but not you, you're okay. And I was saying this for my Jewish relatives whom I knew, they stereotyped in the other direction. They were okay with helping the black community, but they didn't want to help that individual. And I'll have to say, I never knew my grandfather, but my grandmother, she was a racist and a bigot. And my uncle, who had a bottling thing, he was pretty much the same. And I also know that my grandfather, who came to this country when he was 6 in the late 1800s, his one goal was to rise up. And they lived in a community called Overbrook, which is on the way to Pottstown, but still part of the Philadelphia area. And they were the only Jews in the neighborhood. And that was my grandfather's goal. And my father grew up in West Philadelphia. His family was super poor, and it was 100% Jewish community. They couldn't get out. So, like I said, I'm speaking frankly, my family, they were sort of the opposite of Chona and Malachi in what they really saw within their community. Yeah. And, you know, my grandfather eventually opened up his store on City Line, which if anybody's familiar with Philadelphia, that's Route 1 that goes straight through Philadelphia, and that's like the place to be. So, I'm glad Mr. McBride told the story that he told, maybe not the one of my own grandfather and grandmother. So I appreciate everybody listening.
Are you going to read page 62?
Oh, I'm not going to read it. It's
okay.
too long to read, but I recommend.
Okay. All right.
It made me think, because it could have been, you know, like I said, my grandfather and my wife's grandfather. He had a fish store in Chelsea, which is part of Boston, and I'd say him and his wife were pretty much ran the same course as my grandfather, but whereas my grandfather was fairly successful. I mean, they were well off. Her grandfather, not so much. It was in the other direction. They were pretty poor.
I want to go take us back a little bit to Dodo and Monkey Pants here, because he ends by saying, "Thank you, Monkey Pants." Quoting from the book, "Finger, that one solidarity white finger, reaching out in friendship and solidarity, shone in his memory like a bright, shining star." The relationship between Dodo and Monkey Pants is both inspirational and heartbreaking. How do you respond to ugly friendship and each of their fates? How did you respond to that relationship? It was interesting in that environment. It was good that they had one another.
I would say both of us.
Okay?
I felt glad that they had each other, because that kind of, I mean, didn't make it, made it a little better, a little tolerable, and their communication style that they worked out, I thought was really interesting, you know, with the alphabet and how they had to.
It wasn't that something?
Yes.
The way they created that without really being able to explain to each other what they were creating.
Right.
And you mentioned the marbles before.
Yeah.
You know how Chona would take marbles for payment? What did Dodo and Monkey Pants share?
Marble.
Yeah, that symbol of
I think it was someone over
right?
here too. Yeah.
I love this part of the book because it showed two children in horrific conditions, and they were able to support one another, have love within a horrible environment, and it was just very uplifting. And I like the way that the author ended the book the way he did, because I was just waiting for that, and sure enough,
There it was.
there it was.
Yeah, yeah. It's interesting that all of his lessons, if you will, all of what McBride was trying to tell us came through Chona and children. And it was wonderful that it was so much of it was spoken through the children.
I thought McBride was truly a genius in how he presented so many themes in this novel, right? Racism, anti-Semitism, child abuse, you name it. He took on the skeletons in our national closet. And I thought a very beautiful way. But it was annoying to have to introduce all these characters to be able to do that. You can't remember these characters. But he established that community. And I thought it was nice at the end how McBride wrapped it up by saying that Moshe started a camp for disabled children in honor of Chona. And Nate Love, Dodo, died on June 22nd, 1972, the day the Hurricane Agnes strikes Pottstown, wipes out all the evidence of anything, coincidentally. And do you recall in the book where Dodo found his healing? I quote, in the sight, smell, and feel of the beautiful Low Country.
I want
We have
to, I
one
think,
question before you end it?
Yes,
I
please.
think earlier you had said that Mr. McBride said skepticism and cynicism, and where he's going to be more, he himself, skeptical, and yet you get to see all these characters kind of going through those, who were the cynical ones, and then growing toward skepticism until there is that, the finger touching and that kind of beautiful communication.
Yeah. I think Sugar and I both loved this book. I don't know how many of you loved it. And listening to McBride being interviewed, it made me love it even more, because I appreciated all the subtleties he wove into this novel. And it was beautiful, in my opinion, because he is one to speak. He's Jewish, he's African American, he grew up, poor, now is very wealthy. He's seen a lot and done a lot. And I thought this, we really wanted to have this book presented. It doesn't stay on the New York Times bestseller list for no reason, and it was Barnes & Noble's Book of the Year.
Sold 1 million copies the first year it was out, which had broke all kinds of records.
So I hope you all loved it as much as we did.
We've got a comment.
Oh, sorry. I'm sorry.
The one other thing I wanted to say about the relationship between Dodo and Uncle Vance was that I thought it really illustrated the importance of just having one person that can.
Very nice.
Because how many times do we hear about the mass shooters who feel they are always referred to as lonely. They don't have a friend. And how important it is to just make eye contact with someone. Just let them know that they exist.
I'd say that's a lovely observation. I like that.
I wanted to close us with comments from a New York Times review. I can't claim I really like what this says, but I don't want you to think I wrote it. The old English teacher in me does not like plagiarism. So I want to give credit to a reviewer in the New York Times. I would like to leave you with a couple of lines from this review. The Heaven and Earth grocery store is a charming, smart, heart-blistering, and heart-healing novel. Great love bursts through these pages by the friends and families that mobilize to protect Dodo, a child endangered by the structures he was born into and injured by. And against seemingly impossible odds, even in the midst of humanity's most wicked designs, love, community, and action can save us. So I think he may be painting a dire picture in parts of this book, but a very hopeful community and lesson for all of us. Thank you for joining us today.